What up, Space Fam? Goes in here from AnimeUproar, back at it again to discuss One Piece. The response on my Every Yonko and Their Powers Explained video was great, so I decided it was about time to do a video based on every Yonko's backstory. I think we're all interested in how these mad lads came to be. If you do enjoy seeing One Piece videos like this one on the channel and want to keep them coming, the best thing you can do is smash that like button and share this video with any cultured pirates that you know. If you haven't, be sure to subscribe, and this is crucial. Hit that notification bell and select all, or you will miss future One Piece videos. And as you wait for the next one to drop, feel free to check out my growing One Piece playlist, where I got videos about the Yonko and their powers, warlords, supernovas, and much more. Before we continue, a quick thank you to Displate for sponsoring this video. I've actually owned several Displates for years, even before it was cool, and I've always loved their product. A Displate is a one-of-a-kind metal poster that you can customize, collect, and use to sharply increase the cool factor of any space, whether it's your room, your office, or even the bathroom. The quality and durability of these posters is incredible, and I can say from experience that even after several years, a display looks as good as on the first day. On top of that, it only takes like 20 seconds or less to set them up with Displate's easy to use mounting system, no power tools, no damages, no frustrations, and Displate is more than just a poster company. They support emerging artists through their licensed art marketplace, and they believe in helping people and helping the planet. They are part of the massive Forest Garden project, which has planted over 12 million trees in Africa. And for every print you purchase, they will plant one new baby tree. Check them out for yourself. Just click that top link in the description, and if you act now, you can take advantage of their big Halloween sale. Get 30% off when you buy 1 or 2 Displates, and 36% off when you buy 3 or more. Click the link and see the quality for yourself. Now, without further ado, let's jump into it, spoilers and all. At this point, I probably don't need to explain that the Yonko aka Emperors are a big deal. We're talking influence, huge bounties, the strongest pirate crews, one of the great powers that balance the world, and so on. If you want an even more detailed breakdown on what it means to be a Yonko, then I recommend you check out my original Every Yonko and Their Powers Explained video that I'll link in the description. But for this one, let's just jump into specific Yonko. And I'm going to begin with the man known as the strongest man in the world, the late, great Edward Newgate, aka Whitebeard. Although he passed away, Whitebeard was as legendary as you can hope to get. He was part of the strongest crew during the Rocks era, then he was a rival to Gol D. Roger, the Pirate King, and then he became a Yonko with the highest bounty, a bounty over 5 billion berries. He was even called the man closest to the One Piece. So let's rewind time and see how this legendary figure known as Whitebeard came to be. Whitebeard was born on the island of Sphinx. It was too poor to pay the heavenly tribute, and thus too poor to remain part of the world government. As a result, it became a lawless island that suffered from pirates and slavers running amok. The poor country collapsed and created a fresh generation of orphans. Whitebeard was one of these orphans. He went to sea at a young age while he continued to pump pirate money and supplies into his village all throughout his life. Although he didn't have a family there, that village would always be his home. So yeah, Whitebeard didn't have it easy. He had to grow up in poverty with no parents, meaning he had to grow up all the quicker. In his early days of being a pirate, when he was just another member of a crew and going by his real name Newgate, he was called out for not being interested in treasure. His fellow crew member asked him what he wanted, and the young Newgate said he still wanted the same thing he wanted ever since he was a boy, a family. Clearly, growing up as an orphan significantly shaped Whitebeard and his goals. Because he didn't have a family growing up, he never took such things for granted and would eventually go on to form a crew that would serve as his family, where the crew members were viewed as his sons. But before that happened, he joined the Rocks Pirates, one of the most legendary and OP pirate crews in the history of One Piece. The Rocks Pirates were led by Captain Rocks D. Zebek, and it not only included a younger Whitebeard, but a younger Big Mom and a younger Kaido as well. The list of OP crew members goes on, but the point is, they were hella strong and they ruled the seas before the rise of Gol D. Roger. The story goes that during the God Valley incident, the Rocks Pirates, the strongest crew in the world, were wiped out on an island called God Valley. According to Sengoku, in order to protect the Celestial Dragons and their slaves at God Valley, Garp joined forces with Gold D. Roger and they broke apart the infamous Rocks Pirates. Then Whitebeard founded his own pirate crew, the Whitebeard Pirates. At some point, they got shipwrecked on Wano and met Kozuki Oden. The two briefly clashed and Oden caused Whitebeard to break a sweat before Oden asked to ride on Whitebeard's ship. Whitebeard wasn't a fan of the idea initially. He could tell that Oden was not the type of person to serve someone else, he was a leader. And Whitebeard knew what happens when you got people like that together in a group. He said he had plenty of bad experiences with that in his last crew. This suggests that this was one of the big issues with the Rocks Pirates. It wasn't necessarily that they weren't strong enough to survive, but rather that they had too many leaders in one group, so that they couldn't function effectively. But Whitebeard liked Oden, but he nonetheless tried to leave before Oden would notice. But Oden yearned for adventure so bad that he prepared for this. He attached a chain to their ship and wouldn't let go or accept no as an answer. Eventually, Whitebeard gave in to Oden's stubbornness. He let him aboard his ship, but notably referred to him as little brother rather than son. Izo was there at this point too, since he had held on to Oden when the latter held onto the chain and Izo was pulled aboard. And also Inuarashi and Nekomamushi were stowed away in the ship, so all of them joined Whitebeard's crew for this period. 2 years after Oden joined, Whitebeard created divisions and made Oden the commander of the 2nd Division. At some point, Whitebeard met Marshal D. Teach, aka Blackbeard, and let him join the crew. 4 years after Oden joined the crew, Hiyori and Momonosuke were already born, and the Whitebeard Pirates encountered Gold D. Roger and his crew. At this super hype moment, we saw Oden attack Roger and then get sent flying. Then Whitebeard proceeded to attack Roger. Each person's haki was so strong that when they clashed, their weapons weren't even touching. The two crews then proceeded to battle for 3 days and 3 nights. Neither got the upper hand, and the attempt to pillage one another became a gift exchange. It was at this point that young Shanks and Buggy got to meet Blackbeard, and Buggy mentioned that they say that Blackbeard never slept in his life and called him a monster. But more on Blackbeard later. At this point, Roger had yet to reach the final island, and he needed Oden's help, since Oden could read the poneglyphs. At this point, Goldie Roger bowed his head to Whitebeard, while asking to borrow Oden for a year. Roger's crew was outraged, but that's another thing you can say about Whitebeard. The Pirate King himself bowed to him. Whitebeard was outraged at first, viewing the request as Roger trying to steal his family from him. As we know by now, if there is one thing that Whitebeard values above all else, it's his crew, aka his family. Whitebeard was not happy at all, but eventually let Oden leave because he wanted to. Roger left him a fortune in exchange for letting him borrow Oden, but it did little to ease the upset Whitebeard. And he even told his crew to give them back the food so that Oden's family doesn't go hungry. Even after they part ways, Whitebeard can't help but care deeply about Oden and his family. Izo stayed with Blackbeard, while Inuarashi and Nekomamushi joined Oden and his family. Once when Shanks met with Whitebeard, Whitebeard told him that his crew clashed with Roger so many times that he began to remember faces among his crew, including Shanks' face and Buggy's face. And that right there adds to the legend of Buggy D. Clown. But anyways, Roger proceeded to make it to the last island called Laugh-Tale, which should hold the One Piece. He became the Pirate King, but there remained a respect between Whitebeard and Roger. Their relationship remained one of equals. Shortly before Roger's death, the two met up to say their goodbyes. Keep in mind, Roger was terminally ill before the famous execution. They drank together, and Roger even offered to tell Whitebeard how to get to Laugh-Tale. But Whitebeard refused the offer, saying he wouldn't go even if Roger told him where it was because he wasn't interested. Whitebeard could have got there and even claimed the One Piece, but he was never interested in that. Ironically, the man closest to the One Piece had no desire to get it. Roger proceeded to tell Whitebeard about the significance about people with D in their name. At one point after the famous pirate Shiki the Golden Lion escaped from Impel Down, he came to Whitebeard. He proclaimed that it was now Whitebeard's era with Roger gone. Shiki spoke of a plan, but the main thing I enjoyed seeing was how little respect Whitebeard paid to someone as legendary as Shiki. He straight up said that if Shiki came to babble nonsense at him, then he'll toss him overboard. Not many people could talk like that to the Golden Lion. After the Golden Lion went to seclusion, Whitebeard became the undisputed top dog, since he was the only one who could fight on equal terms with the Pirate King before he got executed. When Shanks went to visit Whitebeard, we also learned that Whitebeard witnessed Shanks' duel with Mihawk. and that it is still fresh in his memory, so he definitely stayed in the loop of pirate happenings. Eventually, the world government gave Whitebeard the title of one of the 4 emperors of the sea because of his immense power, and based on his bounty, it appears that they continued to view him as the most dangerous despite his growing age and failing health. And then Whitebeard did another thing to cement how good of a guy he is. He went on to help Fishman Island and all of the fishmen and merfolk living there. As Jinbei explained, all pirates who sail the Grand Line eventually have to pass Fishman Island. When the Great Age of Pirates began, the island was ravaged. It had been overwhelmed by pirates and naval forces chasing after them. Many fishmen and merfolk were captured and sold off. It was terrible, and according to Jinbei, everyone was in despair. But Whitebeard came to the rescue. He proclaimed that it was his territory and thus put it under his protection. One of the reasons he did this was also because he was good friends with King Neptune. But anyways, when he proclaimed the territory as his own, with that one sentence he ended the plundering of Fishman Island. Jinbei says that that's power, and he also notes that Whitebeard protected many other islands like that as well. Before he met Ace, Whitebeard read about him in the papers and thought he had a lot of spirit for an upstart, since he turned down an offer to be one of the 7 warlords of the sea. Then one day Ace was looking for Whitebeard, but ended up fighting Jinbei for 5 days straight because Jinbei didn't want to let Ace get to Whitebeard. It's kind of funny, after the two collapse on the ground from exhaustion from this long fight, Whitebeard shows up and says, and I quote, "So you want to take my head? Then have at it. I'll take you on." Imagine being in a 5-day battle without getting the upper hand, and then the strongest Yonko showing up to battle you. Not exactly ideal conditions for victory. Ace then told his men to run, before being completely overpowered by Whitebeard. Still though, Whitebeard was so impressed that Ace continued to get up that he decided it would be a waste to kill him. He told him that if he wants to terrorize the seas, to do it in his name. Then Whitebeard offered his hand and told Ace to become his son. Now Ace, being Ace, wasn't one to start blindly following someone just like that. He tried to assassinate Whitebeard multiple times, but he always failed. Whitebeard was so confident that he let Ace roam around with no chains even after over 100 assassination attempts, and even though he was already old and had tubes sticking out from his nose. His crew would even save Ace when he was thrown overboard during a failed attempt. Eventually, Ace stopped trying to kill Whitebeard, and Whitebeard wanted Ace to be the Division 2 commander. But Ace doubted himself. He told Whitebeard that he was Roger's son, aka the son of Whitebeard's enemy, thinking that Whitebeard would want him to get lost. But Whitebeard didn't even think that that was important enough to discuss. He said, "We're all children of the sea, so it doesn't matter where anyone's from or who their father is." Ace was shocked, and he'd go on to become one of Whitebeard's most loyal men. However, when Blackbeard, who was in Ace's division, killed 4th Division Commander Thatch, Ace decided to go after him on his own, against the wishes of Whitebeard, who had a bad feeling about this one. Ace didn't listen, but it was because he'd come to respect Whitebeard so much. For him, Blackbeard threw dirt in Whitebeard's face and ran, and Ace refused to let anyone dishonor Whitebeard's name. That is the kind of love and passion that Whitebeard inspired in his sons, even ones that wanted to kill him at first. And the story of the epic Whitebeard goes on, but that's it for the backstory portion, where we got a sense of the kind of man Whitebeard was. Selfless, caring, and strong AF too. If you do want me to cover his whole life at some point, or one of the other Yonko's lives, let me know in the comments. It's an epic life, definitely worthy of its own video, but for now let's move on to Shanks' backstory. Shanks is relatively young for a Yonko, only 39 years old after the time skip, and yet has already accomplished so much and has one of the most hype auras around him. Let's look at the origins of this mysterious and epic dude. Shanks is from the West Blue, and as we saw, around 30 years ago, at the age of 9 or so, he was an apprentice on Gold D. Rogers' crew. Luffy, in contrast, is 17 when he sets out on his pirate adventure, so Shanks got into the game young, along with his clown friend Buggy. He's seen reading the paper with Buggy, and they're both ticked off because the news is about Whitebeard rather than about the Roger Pirates. At this point, Shanks already has the straw hat that used to belong to Roger. It's the same iconic hat that he'd go on to give to Luffy one day. Buggy and Shanks would argue hard about whether it's colder in the North Pole or the South Pole, and they'd both get really into it, just like brothers. Silver's Rayleigh would get annoyed by them, hit him, and lecture them about how it didn't matter where it was colder, but if they really wanted to know, they should go find out for themselves rather than pointlessly argue, which is great advice. Less talk and more action is definitely a winning mindset. Buggy was like a male clown Nami, in the sense that he loved the idea of treasure and becoming rich. For Shanks though, it clearly wasn't about the treasure, and as a result, Buggy said that Shanks and the others aboard the crew were soft because they didn't have the proper appreciation for booty. Buggy tells Shanks that he's lost sight of what being a pirate is about, and for him it's clearly about getting treasure and wealth. However, that's one of the interesting things about One Piece. Everyone makes up their own definition of what it means to be a pirate, and for people like Luffy it means freedom, and I gotta say I prefer that answer. Even as a young person, Shanks seems to have liked booze. But even then, as a youngster, Shanks knew he'd go off on his own someday as the captain of his own ship. He mainly focused his attention on making time to see the world, while mentioning that he'd do some pirating too. So it seems like exploration, adventure, and discovering what the world has to offer through travel were definitely some of Shanks' main motivating factors. He definitely never wanted to work for Buggy, explaining that they think differently, so they'd be better off going their own separate ways. Being a pirate is all about going your own way, Shanks said, again emphasizing the importance of freedom that Luffy values too. Buggy said that if they ever crossed paths on the high seas, it would be a fight to the finish, and Shanks agreed, saying that's also what being a pirate is about. So despite being called soft by Buggy, Shanks always knew that fighting and even killing were parts of being a pirate. After Shanks tells Buggy one day that the crew has discovered a devil fruit, Buggy doesn't care until he hears it's worth a lot of money. He pretends to eat it but eats a fake and steals the real thing. One day though, Shanks catches him by surprise. Buggy puts the fruit in his mouth. Shanks leaves thinking that Buggy is stealing food, only to suddenly come back, surprising Buggy into swallowing the devil fruit he never wanted to swallow because he thought losing power to swim would be ridiculous for a pirate. Buggy then jumps overboard for a treasure map and can't swim because he ate the fruit and all. Despite the arguments they had, Shanks didn't hesitate to jump in and save Buggy. He also wore a concerned expression on his face when he jumped overboard. The most hilarious thing is that Buggy framed this story as Shanks making him swallow 100 million berries, while Luffy saw the story for what it was, a story of how Shanks saved Buggy's life. The Roger Pirates eventually clashed with the Golden Lion Pirates led by Shiki in what became known as the Ed War. Shiki wanted Goldie Roger to become his right-hand man, so they could conquer the world, but Roger obviously wouldn't do something like that, and so they fought. According to Roger, he didn't want to rule anything. He asked what's the point of being a pirate if you don't do things the way you want. But before the battle, Buggy was freaking out about the Golden Lion and worried about his life, while Shanks was super calm saying who cares, Buggy won't die if he gets cut into pieces anymore because of his devil fruit powers. I love this that Kid Shanks could even be calm when his life was in danger. As mentioned, during Whitebeard's backstory, the two crews meeting the Whitebeard and Roger Pirates met on an island and clashed before chilling out and finishing on pretty good terms with one another. 4 days after the initial clash was when Buggy noticed Blackbeard and how he didn't sleep a wink during the ceasefire last night or the night before, and how they say that he never slept in his life. The way that Buggy and Shanks respond to this same piece of info tells us a lot about their characters, even though they're so young here. It was remarked that both Shanks and Buggy already had the attitude of grown men, but they were very different. For Shanks, Blackbeard is lucky and his life must be twice as fun because he doesn't need to sleep. But Buggy insists on focusing on the fact that he's a monster. Buggy is more freaked out, while Shanks is more excited and impressed. Thus, with such contrasting personalities, it makes sense that the two were constantly arguing, but that doesn't change the fact that they were super close and always seen together, to the point that even Whitebeard remembered them together. After this encounter with the Whitebeard Pirates, as we saw during Whitebeard's backstory, Oden ended up joining the Roger Pirates. And together they went on to visit Skypiea as well. They went on to many places, like Water 7 and Fishman Island. Toki fell ill and had to disembark in Wano, and Inuarashi and Nekomamushi disembarked with her, while she made Oden carry on in the adventure. Soon after, Buggy caught a fever and had to forego the voyage to Laugh Tale. And Shanks, being the mad lad he is, decided to stay and care for Buggy, saying if we're gonna go to the final island, we'll take our own ship someday. Oden said that he didn't know if Shanks and Buggy were best friends or mortal enemies, which I feel like captures their relationship perfectly. But wow, you really got a good sense of how good of a guy Shanks is through his backstory as well. With a smile on his face, he missed out on the final leg of the voyage, and Rogers went on to be hailed for circumnavigating the globe and conquering the sea, becoming the king of the pirates as a result. Afterwards, Roger did regroup with Shanks and Buggy. Shanks asked Roger something, we do not know exactly what it was, but possibly about his terminal illness, and then Shanks shed tears afterwards. At some point, Buggy offered to lend Oden a hand if he needed it, and Shanks offered to help as well if he needed anything. Which is why I think it would be awesome if he came to Wano and helped carry out Oden's wish for it. But we'll see if that pans out. But anyways, Roger disbanded the crew after he came back from Laughtale and became the Pirate King. He got off the ship first and told them to make sure to get Oden home next. At this point, Roger was already in the final stages of his disease, and his crew, and especially Shanks and Buggy, cried when he left. 1 year after the crew was disbanded, Roger turned himself in to the world government. Shanks was present at the execution and he cried after Roger was executed, as did Buggy. Despite what he said before, Shanks asked Buggy to come along with him after the execution at Logtown. But Buggy was not down to become one of Shanks' subordinates. Since then, Shanks has heard rumors about Buggy's pirating. Shanks went on to create his own crew. He went to Seer Village to recruit Yasop, Usopp's dad, after hearing of his reputation. At some point, he also got the 3 scars he has on his left eye from Blackbeard, who was still a member of Whitebeard's crew. Shanks would later tell Whitebeard that it's the only scar he has that still aches, and that he didn't get the scar because he was careless, implying that Blackbeard was a beast even before his acquisition of 2 OP Devil Fruits. Shanks was also known to duel with Mihawk, the greatest swordsman in the world. In fact, Whitebeard mentions that Shanks' duel with Mihawk is still fresh in his memory when they meet. Clearly, it was an epic duel, and although this isn't technically backstory, Whitebeard mentions that everyone was surprised beyond belief when Shanks came back with a missing arm from the East Blue, not believing that any opponent could do that to him. The rest is pretty straightforward. 12 years ago, Shanks arrived at Dawn Island and met Luffy. Shanks made the village his temporary base for a year. Luffy got attached and wished to join the crew, but Shanks wouldn't let him because he was too young. Then we can cue Shanks giving the straw hat to Luffy and giving up his arm for him. Again, Shanks' whole life would be worth looking at, but since this is about backstories, we should be moving on. But from what we've seen thus far, Whitebeard and Shanks were definitely more on the side of good than bad when you look at their characters. Let's see if that keeps up as we look at Blackbeard, aka Marshall D. Teach. The first Yonko we'll be looking at with the infamous D in his name. Around the time that Oden was put in charge of the 2nd Division of the Whitebeard Pirates, they encountered Teach. Teach was an orphan who begged to join the Whitebeard Pirates, saying he had nowhere else to go. He even had a tear in his eye. Whitebeard decided to let the 12-year-old future Yonko join his crew, which is not really surprising because after hearing his backstory, we know how much Whitebeard values family and how much he'd take pity on an orphan who didn't have any. Blackbeard is one of the most interesting characters in One Piece for me, because of his level of planning and patience. You then add his ever-growing power, and you got one of my favorite anime antagonists ever. According to Blackbeard, all his life, he was searching for the Yami Yami no Mi, aka the Dark Fruit, that turns you into a darkness human. This is the reason he stayed on Whitebeard's ship for decades, because he knew it was his best chance of finding that specific fruit. In Blackbeard's view, him having this specific devil fruit, that's said to be the most dangerous in the history of all devil fruit powers, makes him the strongest in the world. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Yes, Blackbeard was apparently always looking for the dark fruit, but many things happened before he eventually killed 4th Division commander of the Whitebeard Pirates Thatch and took it for himself. And by the way, the historical Blackbeard's name was Edward Teach, and alternatively spelled Edward Thatch. So it's interesting that One Piece Blackbeard Marshall D. Teach killed the other person, Thatch, who was also a reference to the historic Blackbeard's name. It's like he wanted to make it clear that there could only be one Blackbeard. But real history aside, we mentioned the clash between the Whitebeard Pirates and Roger Pirates, where they fought, they partied, and eventually Oden went with Roger. This is the third and last time we'll be quickly bringing this up, because the other Yonko that will come next weren't present. Shanks is supposed to be only a bit younger than Blackbeard, so it's cool that the two youngest Yonko met each other so early on when they were working under the two strongest pirates. Blackbeard was curious about Shanks and Buggy and asked if they were apprentices. As mentioned, the two apprentices didn't look very tough, but they had the attitudes of grown men. Then we jump to the perspective of Shanks and Buggy, and at this point Buggy mentions that Blackbeard didn't sleep a wink during the ceasefire last night or the night before, and that they say Blackbeard never slept in his life. Even though he was just a kid, Buggy viewed him as a monster. And there's some truth to that. The fact that they clashed for 3 days and nights and no one saw Blackbeard sleep, not even after the fighting was over, is pretty crazy, and it builds up the terrifying mystery around Blackbeard as well. When Shiki went to visit Whitebeard after the prison break, an around 18-year-old Blackbeard is seen on board, looking much more similar to his present-day self. And it's perfect that he's just chilling in the background, and you can easily miss him if you don't pay attention. It is exactly what is so terrifying about Blackbeard, that he could keep his true motives and intentions a secret for so long. At some point later, Blackbeard and Shanks would clash again, and this time Blackbeard would leave the 3 scars over Shanks' eye. And as Shanks made clear, it was not because he was careless. Shanks straight up tells us that even before he got his OP Devil Fruit powers, Blackbeard was seemingly good enough to get the better of a prepared Shanks in a battle, and he left a deep impression on Shanks mentally, not just physically. And to me, this is one of the craziest details we have about Blackbeard. Sure, we don't see how it happened, and we don't know how much weaker Shanks was then compared to now, but Shanks, a Yonko, clearly feels like Blackbeard is a very dangerous being. I mentioned how Whitebeard promoted Ace to 2nd Division Commander, and Ace had a convo with Blackbeard about it. As Ace told Blackbeard, and I quote, "You've been with Whitebeard the longest," end quote. Everyone knew Blackbeard clearly had the strength to step up, and Ace was saying he'd be the better choice too, because he'd been on the crew for decades. This is just a brief moment in an Ace-focused flashback, but wow, it's so good. Blackbeard looks so content and merry as he stuffs his face with food. He laughs and replies that he doesn't have those kinds of ambitions, and encourages Ace to be the commander. Meanwhile, he was plotting to become the strongest and the next pirate king the whole time. Blackbeard's ambition was arguably the highest it could get, and yet he played the role of unambitious, supportive crewmate perfectly so that no one expected him for decades. Let's just say if he ever played as the imposter in Among Us, he would never be sus. I think Shanks said it best when he said that Blackbeard laid low and waited for his chance. He didn't even rise up to become a squad leader or make a name for himself. He hid himself behind the giant shadow of Whitebeard, and once he had enough power, he finally made his move. As Shanks says, a man like that will never be satisfied, he'll keep aiming for the top, end quote. And that's what makes Blackbeard so terrifying, his ability to plan and wait, his patience. But anyways, Blackbeard proceeded to kill Thatch, take the Yami Yami no Mi, and start his own crew. It was then that he adopted the name Blackbeard and formed the Blackbeard Pirates. And Blackbeard is sort of the perfect name because he's kind of implying that Whitebeard's era is over with his very name, since a Whitebeard suggests old age, while a Blackbeard in contrast suggests vitality or a man in his prime. Ace went chasing after Blackbeard because Blackbeard was in his division, killed a brother, and disgraced Whitebeard, even though Shanks and Whitebeard did not want Ace to go, since they both had a bad feeling about Blackbeard. Interestingly enough, before Luffy arrived to Drum Kingdom, Blackbeard and his crew pillaged it and sent Wapol fleeing in the process, and as a result, actually liberated the Drum Kingdom from him, as ironic as that sounds. And again, plenty more interesting things happened involving the now 2 Devil Fruit having master planning Yonko Blackbeard, but since this is about backstories, it's about time to move on to Kaido, the pirate dubbed the strongest creature in the world. So, over 40 years ago, a young Kaido was an apprentice on the famous Rocks Pirates crew. His crew members included fellow future Yonko Whitebeard and fellow future Yonko Big Mom. And I'm focusing on the Yonko in particular, but many other powerful pirates were members of the Rocks Pirates, including the Golden Lion, the Silver Axe, Captain John, Wang Ji, Captain Rocks himself, and so on. At some point, Big Mom did something that made Kaido owe her big time. Although Kaido would later say that's in the past, Big Mom responded that it is a lifelong debt. So we have yet to figure out what exactly Big Mom did to put Kaido in her debt, but it's definitely something that will be revealed down the line. 38 years ago at God Valley, the Rocks Pirates, the strongest crew in the world, were defeated by the combined forces of Monkey D. Garp and Gold D. Roger. According to the news at least, the Rocks Pirates were a rampaging force of evil that none had been able to stop up until this point. After this battle, the Rocks Pirates were broken apart, but obviously many of the members survived and continued to thrive long after. One of them was Kaido, and although he's arguably portrayed as the strongest living Yonko, he's not undefeatable. We were told that since he became a pirate, he tasted defeat on 7 different occasions, and he's been caught by the Navy or enemy ships no less than 18 times. He was tortured time and time again and lived as a prisoner. He was sentenced to death 40 times, but when he was hanged, the rope snapped. When put under the guillotine, the blade cracked. When skewered, the spear broke, and he sank 9 different prison vessels. Nobody was able to kill him, and that included himself. Now that's how Kaido was introduced to us. So although he's been portrayed as unkillable so far, he hasn't been portrayed as unbeatable. And he was defeated and captured multiple times throughout his life, so that does bode well for Luffy and the Wano arc. We're told 33 years before the present day, the remnants of the legendary Rocks Pirates, including Kaido, began to gather new comrades, aka crews, and were expanding in claims and infamy. As we know, at some point after Gold D. Roger's execution, Kaido, along with Shanks, Whitebeard, and Big Mom, was recognized as one of the top pirates in the world and became one of the 4 emperors of the sea. 28 years ago, Kaido had a daughter named Yamato, if she is in fact his biological daughter as has been suggested. Kaido joined forces with Orochi and supported him as the shogun of Wano. 25 years ago, Oden had come back from his pirate adventures and wanted to retake control of Wano from the traitorous Orochi. But fearing what would happen to the people, he made a deal with Orochi and Kaido. He would not fight and dance like a fool in public once a week. Oden did this because he believed that the citizens would be spared and Orochi and Kaido would leave in 5 years. I don't know why he believed this from someone like Orochi, but it appears that he did believe him. 2 years after Oden returned to Wano, Kaido had a battle with Gecko Moria and the Gecko Pirates. The result was the loss of Moria's crew. Moria was left wanting revenge against Kaido, and he still wants it. So it would totally make sense if he popped up in Wano to help Luffy's side. Just saying. Sometime around this point, a young Yamato would have told Kaido that she wanted to be Kozuki Oden, and he would have clobbered her for saying so. After 5 years of Oden dancing, not only did Orochi have no intention of leaving with Kaido, but they moved in to build a number of new weapons factories in Wano. They imprisoned Hyogoro and killed 16 of his men in the process along with his wife. Oden had had enough and decided it was finally time to strike down Kaido. This is when Kaido reveals everything, that he sensed that his own side was at a disadvantage then. They had less numbers and the samurai and yakuza working together could have been a difficult battle. And so Kaido manipulated Oden and made him think he was choosing a method that would not hurt anyone. Kaido comments that Roger and Whitebeard were like that too, mighty but soft. The fight begins and it lasts longer than expected because, as we're told, Oden's strength surpassed the enemy's imagination. Oden cut Kaido and gave him the big X-shaped scar he has to this day. People were shocked that he landed such a blow on the so-called invincible Kaido. It 100% seemed like Oden had the upper hand. Oden had shook him and he was charging again, saying never come back to Wano. But then he was distracted. It seemed like his son was captured and in danger, and so he stopped and Kaido took advantage of the moment to bring Oden down. It wasn't actually his son though, but Kurozumi Higurashi, who used the power of the clone fruit to copy his appearance. So Kaido won, but not exactly fair and square. Now let's move on to the boiling execution. Kaido seemed to get everything he wanted. Oden asked for a chance for him and his samurai to survive. He said that all 10 would enter, and if any would stand the boiling oil for the amount of time Kaido agrees upon, then they would be allowed to go free. It was supposed to be an instantaneous death sentence, so Kaido laughed and agreed to an hour. Again, you might ask yourself, why would Oden believe him when he already lied before, and he wasn't that trustworthy to begin with? But he agreed to the terms given by Kaido nonetheless. At this point though, he arguably had no choice, since the alternative was certain death for all of them anyways. so I'll sort of brush past the non-Kaido parts here. Oden gets in the boiling oil, tells his 9 samurai to get on a plank that he's holding, and he proceeds to not only stay alive, but to hold them up for the full hour. Some of the viewers, probably Kaido as well, were disappointed that Oden wasn't dying in agony or screaming out. Oden was stoic the entire time. Shinobu was the one who revealed the truth, that Oden was dancing to protect the people from Kaido and Orochi, who had no interest in the well-being of Wano and its people. In fact, Orochi straight up wanted to ruin the country as a means of revenge for the persecution of his people. The truth was out, but it was too late, since they were all surrounded by Kaido and Orochi's men. But Oden made a speech. Oden said that Kaido and Orochi would kill him, but he wanted the people of Wano to carry on his will and to open up Wano in his stead. Oden, the legend as mentioned, survives a full hour to the great applause and cheer of the people of Wano, but Kaido was frowning. Of course, Orochi has no integrity and had no intention of keeping the deal. He changed it to execution by firing squad. But Oden threw up the samurai and told them to open up Wano, and the act allowed them all to escape. Interestingly enough, Kaido apologized for what happened with the old hag. He had the clone fruit user killed. Clearly, he didn't feel right about the way he won. So there's some kind of moral compass there, some guilt that clearly isn't there with Orochi. But it has its limits, since the fair thing would have been to free Oden and fight him one-on-one again, and to keep the agreement to spare him if he survives for 1 hour. But he didn't, and I think the fact that Oden behaved so honorably, even in the face of defeat and death, while Kaido had to resort to such dishonorable means, tore him up over the years and haunted him. That could even be part of the reason that he drinks so much and even tries to take his own life, in the hopes of drowning out that sense of guilt and shame. Nevertheless, Kaido killed Oden with his gun. Yamato was present during the legendary hour and would go on to be one of those who would carry on Oden's will, which would have infuriated Kaido more than anything. Oden represented everything he wasn't and what he hated in himself. And when his own child reminded him of Oden by saying that she was Oden, he would lose it and clobber her. He would also go on to put explosive shackles on her hands to prevent Yamato from escaping Onigashima. However, back to immediately after the execution, Kaido attacked Oden Castle. He had a chance to kill the young son of Oden, Momonosuke. However, after witnessing him crying and noticing how young he was, he decided against it. Instead of sending him falling to his death, he let him go and left him to possibly perish in the flames of the castle. It may not seem like a big difference, but doing this, he shows he wasn't willing to kill the boy directly, and he gave him a chance, however small, of surviving. And he did survive. Again, there's that glimpse of Kaido's conscience, which doesn't always win out, but is clearly more active than Orochi's. Kaido also managed to get his hands on one of the 4 road poneglyphs that are needed to find the exact location of Laugh Tale and the One Piece. Kaido went on to brutally put down a rebellion that took place 10 years ago. He also crossed paths at some point with Shutenmaru, the leader of the Mount Atama Thieves, aka Ashura Doji, and has been wanting to recruit him ever since. Then, most recently, Kaido was working with Warlord, Doflamingo, and mad scientist Caesar the Clown on Smiles, aka Artificial Zone Devil Fruits. These fake fruits helped Kaido increase the power of the Beast Pirates. When they worked, these fake fruits allowed Kaido to give Beast Pirate members animal-based powers, even when there weren't any actual Zone Devil Fruits available. Thus, you can probably see why Smiles are very useful to have for the leader of the Beast Pirates and the so-called strongest creature in the world. Kaido wants to rule over a big and OP animal kingdom. Although it wasn't technically before the main One Piece story started, it's also worth mentioning that Kaido was going to try to kill Whitebeard before the Paramount War, but Shanks interfered somehow. We have no idea how Shanks changed Kaido's mind, but the beastly Yonko didn't show up to Marineford, so Shanks clearly managed to persuade him, and then the red-haired Yonko showed up to Marineford unscathed and proceeded to stop the fighting there too. Very intriguing indeed, and I hope we find out more about this encounter as we move forward. And that about covers Kaido's complex backstory, so for the purposes of this video, let's now turn to Yonko Big Mom, aka Charlotte Linlin, who is currently in an alliance with Kaido in the story. Her current bounty is 4,388,000,000 berries, the second highest of any living Yonko, the first being Kaido's. So yeah, their alliance is most definitely a big deal, and this alliance arguably happened because of the history these two share, which was in part revealed through their backstories. But let's start at the beginning. When she was about 5, but absolutely huge in comparison to her normal-sized human parents, her mom and dad brought her to the island of Elbaf, the home of giants. They are also known as the warriors of Elbaf. Not gonna lie, her backstory is super tragic, so there's your warning. As far as we can tell, Charlotte had a good-natured heart and good intentions. And you can't really blame a 5-year-old for what they do anyways, but her parents decided to abandon her on the island. They told her to wait for them, but they had no intention of coming back. They encouraged her with sweets, and Charlotte promised to be a good girl and to wait. And so she waited and waited and waited. Her mother did feel bad about abandoning her, but the father told her she caused so much damage that exile was merciful and that she was too much for them to handle. They put their hopes in the Holy Mother of the land, aka Mother Carmel, to look after her. Time passed, the weather changed, it snowed, and still giant little Charlotte continued to wait. She got hungry and cried out for her parents, but they never came. Lucky for her, Mother Carmel had founded an orphanage named House of Lambs that took in children without anywhere else to go, regardless of their status and race. And Charlotte was clearly such a child. An 80-year-old Carmel gave her a home and a place where she could potentially belong and live with others in happiness. Charlotte was super cheery about the whole thing. She smiled brightly, not complaining about the absence of her parents, but thankful that she found a place where she could live and eat. Elbaf was very cool for her too, since she was used to being huge compared to everyone else. But here she saw people, homes, and sights that were her own size for the first time, and she found it to be a very comforting place. However, problems began to pop up again. In one case, Charlotte saw a bear and wolf fighting in the woods. She knew that fighting was bad, so she put them in a cage together so they could learn to be friends. Then the bear ate the wolf, so she smacked the bear for being naughty. But even though Charlotte was around 5 years old, her power was so great that the little smack instantly killed the bear. Charlotte cried. She didn't mean for things to turn out like that. Carmel seemed like a saint though, and cheered Charlotte up. She focused on how Charlotte was such a sweet, kind girl for wanting them to be friends, and Charlotte felt so touched that someone understood her for the first time in her life. In another case, she was trying to smack a mosquito that was on a giant and accidentally broke several of his bones. And it goes on. Carmel continued to forgive though and tried to make everyone else forgive her too, reminding them that Charlotte meant well. 10 months passed and the mighty warriors of Elbaf were generous enough to welcome Linlin among them. They introduced their custom of a 12-day fast to her, where they only drink water for 12 days and then had a feast. And as you may have guessed, fasting for 12 days is not a good idea for everyone, especially not for Linlin. 7 days in, Charlotte blacked out and went on a rampage looking for the delicious dessert called semla. She straight up destroyed the village of Elbaf. A respected giant warrior chief called Jorul decided that Charlotte only looked like a child but was actually a god of disaster. He went to kill her and she broke his sword with her bare hand, took him by his beard and slammed him into the ground. Jorul, aka Chief Beardhill, another old and respected giant warrior, was about to finish off Charlotte after she got semla and fell asleep. But Carmel begged for mercy and promised to take her and leave, and she got her wish. Jorul died from his wounds, and when Charlotte woke up, she had no idea what had happened. She even had tears in her eyes after hearing news of the death. Word spread of what happened, and not surprisingly, the Giants did not like Linlin anymore. As it turned out, Carmel was actually in the kid-selling business all along, and every other year she sold the liveliest orphans to the government. She wanted to do so with Linlin too, who could potentially become an admiral or even fleet admiral one day. She was going to retire after this, her last big score, so she continued to play the part of Holy Mother. On her 6th birthday, Linlin got a big birthday cake. She was so happy she cried tears of joy. She was surrounded by friends and her precious mother Carmel. There was laughter and merriment. The tears kept flowing to the point where she couldn't see through them. She was so happy. She ate and kept eating, and when it was all over, everyone was gone. Only scraps of clothes remained, suggesting that on the happiest day of her life, Linlin zoned out and ate the only family she had. And this traumatized Linlin, who continued to look for her mother and her friends but never found them. And to this day, she is traumatized by how Mother Carmel, the only person who seemed to understand her, vanished, just like her parents did. This childhood trauma would seemingly become her biggest weakness. By the way, a giant witnessed what Linlin did to the others and reported it back to Elbaf, cementing the hate the Giants had for Linlin even further. Linlin also inherited Carmel's soul fruit during the the incident. A failed pirate cook named Strusen also saw what happened. He had the cook fruit, which allowed him to turn anything into food. He introduced himself to Linlin, seeing potential, and we're told that this meeting launched the eventual Big Mom Pirates. Talking to this cook, a 6-year-old Linlin revealed that her dream was to make a land of peace, a land that Mother Carmel would like. Linlin's bounty started out at 50 million berries and then went up to 500 million. She used her powers to get sweets, offering a land of peace and dreams if people complied. If they disobeyed though, they'd be killed because they were being selfish and didn't want everyone to be happy. Linlin eventually turned the island she was on into Whole Cake Island with the help of the Soul fruit she inherited from Carmel. She also dreamed of making everyone gigantic so they could sit at the table together as equals. Clearly, her methods and rationale are deeply flawed, but from her backstory, it's clear that Linlin didn't want to be a monster. She was well-intentioned, but circumstances helped turn her into the kind of pirate she eventually became. At 18, Linlin gave birth to her first child, Perospero. She then proceeded to give birth about once a year thereafter for 42 years, which helped her earn the title of Big Mom. She would eventually have 85 children with 43 husbands, and this is possible because she sometimes gave birth to multiple children at once, as in the case with twins and even decuplets, if that's how it's pronounced, which is when 10 babies are born at the same time. As mentioned, she did join the Rocks Pirates for a time, but after the God Valley incident, the crew lost its captain and disbanded. 33 years ago, like fellow ex-Rocks Pirates Kaido and Whitebeard, she was working on building her own crew, the Big Mom Pirates. And we already mentioned during Kaido's backstory that somewhere along the way, Big Mom did a big favor for Kaido, and so Kaido still owes her for that. Like Kaido, Big Mom got her hands on one of the 4 poneglyphs needed to get to Laughdale, and according to her, she screwed up and let Roger read the stone, which is how he was able to beat her to Laughdale and become the Pirate King. However, she plans to be the next one to reach it, and she plans to use daughter number 35, the currently 16-year-old Pudding, whose father was from the 3-Eye Tribe, to do it. If 3-Eye Tribe people achieve true awakening, as it's called, then they're supposed to be able to read poneglyphs. So that's Linlin's hope. Now let's turn to daughter Lola for a second, the twin sister of Chiffon and daughter of Pound. One day, she had a surprise suitor who claimed he fell in love at first sight. It was Prince Loki of Elbaf. For Big Mom, it was a perfect opportunity because she could finally fix the strained relationship with the Giants with this marriage, and in the process, gain what's held to be the mightiest fighting force in the world, the Elbaf Warriors. But Lola ran away, wanting to marry for true love, and they tried to pass off Chiffon as Lola as a result, but it didn't work, and things got even worse with the Giants. As Chiffon tells us after that, Big Mom finally gave up on having real giants in their group and began investing in gigantification research instead so she could turn humans into giants. Big Mom was furious and she took it out on Chiffon because she looked like Lola. In a parallel with Kaido, she clobbered Lola, her own daughter. And knowing her backstory now, it's clear that Big Mom's murderous hatred was probably tied to her trauma of being abandoned by her family as a child. That's the thing Big Mom seems to fear the most, and she could never forgive Lola because she did just that. She left her. 5 years ago, the Nox Pirates, aka the Nox Expedition Party, a pirate crew of minks led by Pedro, were looking for a poneglyph. The search brought the crew to Big Mom's territory and they suffered a devastating defeat. Pedro's partner spun Big Mom's roulette wheel and his punishment was 100 years being sucked out of him. He had only 30 left and he died. She was going to take the remaining 70 out of Pedro, but Peckham's pleaded for mercy, saying Pedro was like a brother to him. So she knocked 10 years off, leaving 60. Baron Tamago lost his eye in a fight with Pedro, so Big Mom didn't want to show any more mercy. However, Pedro was determined to return home, and so he sacrificed his own eye, asking how much years would that buy. An eye for an eye and all that. Big Mom, pretty impressed with Pedro, finally settled on taking 50 years from him, and so Pedro survived. Lastly, I'll mention that Big Mom did have a deal with Vinsmoke Judge to marry her daughter Pudding, with Judge's son Sanji for the sake of a political alliance. However, she actually planned to assassinate the Vinsmoke family the whole time and to take their army of clone soldiers and their scientific power. However, her plan continued to be delayed because, as we know, they couldn't locate Sanji. And that is every Yonko's backstory, and I know a lot of you would like to see Luffy's backstory too, since some do consider him to be an emperor already as well, but we'll leave him for every Straw Hat's backstory explained. A video will get started on as soon as we get 6,000 likes on this video, so I'll make you guys work a bit for it. And that is it for this very, very long video. My throat actually hurts from how long I've been talking. I've also been working on the script on and off for a while, so if you did enjoy it, please smash that like button, and when we hit 6,000 likes, I'll get started on the Straw Hat backstories next. You can also help the cause by sharing this video with any cultured pirates that you know and asking them to smash that like button. If you haven't, be sure to subscribe, and this is crucial, hit that notification bell and select all, or you will miss future One Piece videos. Let me know who your favorite Yonko is. Let me know which Yonko's backstory is your favorite so far. And while you wait for the next One Piece video to drop, feel free to check out my growing One Piece playlist, which contains videos about the powers of the Yonko, the warlords, supernovas, and much, much more. Link in the description. Thanks again to Displate for sponsoring this video. Make sure to check them out. Link in the description. And until next time, see ya, Space Cowboys.